You're tuning in to the CyberHub and CISO Talk podcast, Veteran November series that honors the brave men and women who serve this nation by sharing their stories of service. Each year, for the entire month of November, we publish a daily podcast about these veterans. Buckle up and get ready for Veteran November. And now your host, James Azar.
Well, folks, welcome to another great episode of Veteran November. I have a very special guest joining me on today's episode, Dutch Schwartz, the master, the cloud security strategist over there. Dutch, welcome to the show.
Hey, James, thrilled to be here. Always happy to chat with you.
Always happy to have you on, folks. Veteran November is a series I'm doing for the entire month of November. Bring on a veteran for about 10, 15 minutes. We talk about why they joined the military, all kinds of great stuff. So please make sure to like, share, thank them in the comments below as well for their service. That's really all they're asking for. You don't need to send them gift cards or swag or anything. Just a simple thank you goes a long way. Dutch, as we kind of kick off today's episode, I'd love to hear a little bit about what you did in the military and kind of what branch you were in.
Sure. Yeah. So I was in the U.S. Army the entire time. And I'm thrilled that I had the opportunity to do sort of all the things. And what I mean by that is I was enlisted in the National Guard. I was on active duty as an officer. I was in the reserves as an officer, and I was mobilized as an officer. So I've sort of, hopefully, when I talk with people about what the service is and what it means, I'm trying to bring that broad view, of all the different aspects, because all those things are critically important, but they're different, right? And so each of those is a slightly different approach in how they do things. So, I'm very fortunate to have, and I really feel fortunate about being enlisted and an officer. So I'm really leveraged that over the years, probably more valuable than I realized initially, that to have that perspective from both sides is the practitioner perspective. And then the leadership perspective it has been, really helpful for me in my personal career.
It is the service of being, a lot of people think you go active duty, but they forget the National Guard, which is just as important. And then they forget the reserves. How long were you in altogether when you look at from enlistment to
Sure.
service guardsmen and so forth?
Yeah. So 15 years I was a cadet in a portion of that. So it's really from my perspective. So I enlisted on the 39th anniversary of D-Day, so December 7th. So it's from 1990 to 2005. So 15 years, 11 and a half officially, right in my DD 214, but 15 years, was my time and my association with the military.
So very interesting. You enlisted on D-Day.
Yes,
right? So
on purpose.
My next question is, why did you enlist in the service? I'm dying to hear this story. Well, let's hear it. Why?
So if you scroll back, you remember the time period, right? So it's 1990, right? So out of high school, I'm saving up money to go to college. I don't really, and so I saved up enough money to get to pay for one semester. That was my plan. I didn't know what I was going to do beyond that. So I get to university. I had a friend who had a friend. She's like, "Hey, have you ever thought about ROTC?" And I said, "Yeah, I did the ASVAB. I did all the tests. But I grew up in a really small rural town in the Midwest, and I didn't know anybody who was in any of the branches of service. So I didn't really feel like I, could make any kind of informed decision." I said, "Yeah, I looked at it, but I really didn't know enough." And so I was really fortunate that I was then able to meet with other people, and then through the cadets, and of course meet the NCOs in particular, and then get some understanding of, okay, what's this all about? And so I actually technically became a cadet first, and then I started looking, okay, I really want to enlist in the National Guard. And if you remember at the time, George W. was, this was the August to December timeframe as things started to heat up. And so as I looked at doing the enlistment, I talked with the recruiter, and we specifically, I said, "Hey, can we do it on December 7th?" Like that was my goal. So I think it was actually slotted for the 2nd or something, but we moved it slightly. And then I didn't tell my parents because I knew my mom would freak out. So I waited until I was already sworn in, and then I called from the MEP center and then told my parents that, "Hey, I just enlisted in the National Guard." So that was my that was my story, because I knew my mom would be understandably concerned. Right.
What are you thinking about? Right. In that time period, by the way, 1990 was George H.W.
Oh, I just say W. I'm sorry. Yeah, H.W. My fault.
Right. It was H.W. was like right before the Gulf War. You enlisted literally in that time period, right before the Gulf War broke.
Right.
that was a very interesting period, right? Because it was the fall of the Soviet Union,
Right.
like the year before '89,
Yeah.
right? Like you can remember the fall of the Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall coming down, I believe, is it's the reunification of Germany, East Germany and West Germany.
Right.
Man, that's wow. That's a hell of a time.
It was a really cool time period. And you're right, because like when I talked to recruiters, so let's say that was probably in 88, 89, that was what everybody was focused on. The Russians are going to come for the Fulda Gap. There's going to be a big land war in Europe. Like that was sort of the textbooks. That's what, people were focused on. So the whole, what became the Gulf War was totally unexpected. And then from a training standpoint, our most recent conflicts, of course, have been obvious to everybody, Vietnam, but then subsequently Panama and Grenada. So we really understood jungle warfare very, very well. Desert warfare, not so much. We had to go back to like World War II.
Yeah, we did.
That was an interesting time period, but I was very lucky that the instructors, the cadres, we call them, the cadre were, let me think about it, to a person, they were all Vietnam veterans. And so I was really fortunate to be trained by senior NCOs who had been who were veterans of Vietnam, and in some cases Vietnam and Iraq later, as my time went on. So I was that's just really fortunate for me that I learned directly from them. And I would ask them, why do you care so much? Like in a nice way, like, hey, we're like 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, like, probably snotty and arrogant, like, God. And they said, we want you to be the leaders that we didn't have in Vietnam. And that always sat with me. I had a lot of opportunity to learn from them. And they said, I'm going to pour all of my experience and learning into all of you so that you go out and become, really.
Well, I mean, but we can't compare times, right? I mean, the Vietnam time, we had a draft. This country has had a draft since Vietnam.
Sure.
You enlisted, December 7th. D-Day meant something for you.
Absolutely.
Right. For a lot of people, it meant something. If your family's European, if they're Jewish, if they're part of the families or people who were persecuted during World War II and chased down, then D-Day is the day that everything turned. It was the day the tide turned. It was the day where we knew we could win this war and really had Germany on its heels. Vietnam was a very, very different time period. And one that I completely understand. Now you look at that and you kind of go back to all these different skills you just spoke about, but what's one of them that's been really instrumental in your life that the military taught you?
Yeah, I think, I would affectionately call it being a chaos manager, and so I'm not naturally like really organized tightly and regimented, but I learned to do that because I know that, the planning and the preparation is really critical, right? And so you just spend a lot of time planning and preparing and knowing that it will never go that way. And so that mindset of, but I'm going to study, I'm going to know what happened at the Remagen Bridge in World War II, so that if I see something similar, I can apply it to a novel situation, but knowing that it's never going to be that way, right? So this that kind of dual thing where you plan, you prepare, you study, you try to prep, and then that as soon as things begin happening, it won't work out that way. And being comfortable, being uncomfortable. That's what I sort of coach people on. Even my own kids, I'm like, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, I feel like comfort is very overrated.
Yes.
Right? Like It's extremely overrated. Like comfort is scary to me. And I think it's scary for a lot of vets. Right? Like complacency is something that we're taught to despise in the military, right? Like you don't want to be complacent.
Right. Sure.
And I think that's the same in life. When you think of this country, what does America symbolize to you? What does America mean to you, Dutch?
Well, I think America is still probably the best of us from the opportunity to come from completely different backgrounds, completely different frames of reference and cultural models and where we come from, and still try to orient on one thing. I think it's really important that doesn't get lost, right? I think that, does America have lost? Of course, any group of more than two of us, right? Based on humans, you're going to have challenges. You're going to have things that you want to try to improve on, right? But overall, I think the amount of good that can be done in a democratic republic with these opportunities is arguably the best. At least it's the best we've come up with so far, right? And so you really have to kind of lean into that and say, hey, look, we've got challenges, but we have the history of succeeding, through those times that are difficult. So I sort of lean on that we're going to be okay.
This country's seen many dark days. And it rose from the ashes only to survive those and come out stronger. We're the ultimate underdog story. Right? America is the ultimate underdog story. And it'll always remain that. When you look at your transition after your time in the service, what's one key takeaway from your transition that you can share with anyone about your service?
Yeah, I think the key thing, and there's more like kind of skills bridge and training and things today probably than there were in my time frame. Having said that, there's still not enough. And so what I would encourage veterans to think about is, if you focus narrowly on skills, right? Like I know how to do a certain thing, then those are really tangible and easy to describe, but they don't transfer as well. But if you step back, you look at the military overall, any of the branches, it's a learning organization. And I usually argue it's the world's largest learning organization. And we have a long history. And so those lessons that can be applied to a new role are really important. So if you look at competencies, right? Being a self-learner, drive for results, dealing with ambiguity, those things transfer. And you can take those directly out of being a veteran. By the way, whatever your MOS or whatever your specialty was, and you can apply those because competencies will come with you into a new role. Because I can train you. We know how to train people. We know how to coach and lead and train people, right? And so we have a tendency to get really fixated on it. And I'll say the same thing for me personally, right? I wrote my resume when I left, and then I had and somebody say to me, if you didn't know anything about the U.S. Army, not even the military, just about the U.S. Army, like flip it over and then read it again. And I flipped it on. I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing is terrible. I mean, I had acronyms in there. I had words that meant a lot to me, rifle platoon leader. But it doesn't. And it was hard to scratch that out, But it didn't translate. So you have to translate that into, well, what would this mean in a civilian sector? How can I still shine a light on the accomplishments and what I've learned and what I want to retain? You've got to translate that. You've got to make that mental switch, to say, what would this mean to somebody? How can my competencies come through? So that's what I encourage people to do and then bounce it off of other people. Say, read this thing for me. What is this? Will this sing? Will you get it if you read this thing? So yeah, that's what I would take away.
I love that. What's one thing you loved about your military service, Dutch?
A shared sense of purpose, hands down. Like the shared sense of purpose that, yeah, we could disagree. We have, of course, as we have friendly rivalries amongst the branches, which sometimes outside of if you weren't close to the military or in the military yourself, like, what, you guys don't like the insert the other branch here, right? And I'm like, no, but it's like a family. Inside the
unanimous thing. We all don't like the Air Force, right? If
we
you
love
put a Marine and an Army guy in a bar, and an Air Force guy walks in, that moment,
they're always going to be our younger sibling because they were part of the Army, right? And we were kind enough to let them go out on their own, and it's cute. And someday they'll grow up and be a real branch of service. But but inside the family, of course, you close ranks, pun intended, right? And so it's used that shared sense of purpose that whatever it is you do, whether you were a firefighter or a dental assistant or a veterinarian or a military police officer or in a combat, it doesn't matter, right? Because there's a shared sense of purpose that you're trying to, you hope, impact change and do good, with a capital G, as I call it, right? So you're trying to do good. And that shared sense of purpose is much harder to find, right? In civilian roles, you can find it, but it's more difficult.
It's far more difficult. It is. But I think the shared purpose is starting to come back into companies. I think successful companies bring shared purpose as part of the mission statement.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a more of an understanding now that you have to unlock that, right? You have to have a shared sense of purpose, mission, whichever words you prefer, right? But you have to have a culture that says, hey, we're aligned around these things, that we value these things. And when you do that, then people that the creativity comes out, the innovation comes out, the collaboration comes, all of the good things that we all know from our military experience that we probably just experienced because it was just part of the way it was. You notice the absence of it when you go into a culture that's not there. And you're like, whoa, people are just here. And I don't mean this pejoratively, but you're just here for a paycheck? Like, I mean, okay. Like sometimes that is like, you have to like, man, I got to pay my rent this month. I mean, that's one thing, but I mean, in a more general sense, if you can get people aligned around values and a purpose, great things happen. Great things happen when you do that.
Indeed. Folks, Dutch Schwartz, how can people get in touch with you, buddy?
Oh, you can just find me on LinkedIn. That's probably where I'm the most active. Yeah. So just Dutch Schwartz on LinkedIn. Yeah, find me there. I'm always happy to hopefully give good advice to veterans, or at least, listen and mentor and coach people up. So James, appreciate the platform. I love what you do with Veteran in November. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on, folks. Another episode will drop tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern, every single day for the month of November. Please make sure to subscribe and tune in, listen to these stories. And a simple thank you in the comments is all it takes to make some of these men and women feel really good about their service every now and then, and thank them for the month of November anyways. Folks, that's it for us here until tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day, and God bless the United States of America.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.